Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. You would be remembering that we started to study Surah Baqarah. We had studied the first 20 verses, and we had seen that in these first 20 verses, the Prophet Muhammad was addressed, and he was given assurance that as far as his responsibility is concerned, he's not falling short of his responsibility. People who will profess faith are the ones who are right before them, and they are the ones who believe in the hereafter. They believe in what is revealed to them. They believe in what is being revealed earlier on, what had been revealed earlier on, and they have conviction of the hereafter. And as far as the disbelievers are concerned, from among the idolaters and from the people of the book, some of them have decided to deny, and others they are pursuing a policy of reconciliation, but both of them should be very clear in the methodology of the Prophet, that as far as the first of those are concerned, they are not going to accept faith, whatever the Prophet does. And as far as the second ones are concerned, well, there could be a chance, but again, because they are after compromise and they are also not believing in the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so there are slim chances. As far as the first group is concerned, the Almighty, as a punishment, has actually taken away their ability to express faith and profess faith. Their hearts have been sealed, and their other faculties, they are bereft of any understanding. And as far as the second group is concerned, although they also deserve the same treatment, but because there is some chance left in them, so the Almighty is still giving them respite. So now we pick up the Quran from verse 21, Surah Baqarah, verse 21. And as we had discussed earlier on, that it is from here that the direction of address now shifts from Prophet Muhammad to the idolaters of Medina, and in particular the Aus and Khazraj. And because the Jews were also influencing them, and as a result, they too were not very sure of what they should do, because remember, they are the ones who had not received a book ever since Abraham and Ishmael had left them over 2,000 years ago, and they were just left with these oral traditions. And much before the Prophet, if you look at the history, you'll find that although they started off with monotheism, but gradually the Kaaba, the house of God, was filled up with so many idols. And ultimately, we find that when the Prophet Muhammad was raised amongst the Ishmaelites, the Kaaba housed 360 idols of various tribes. So now the address of the Quran is shifting towards these idolaters of Medina. Remember when I was discussing the addressees of Surah Baqarah in the very beginning, we were actually confronted with the fact that the basic addressee of this surah are the Jews of the times of Prophet Muhammad, and as yet they are yet to be addressed directly. So as you can see, that there is a build up towards that address, and once we finish these first 39 verses, you'll find in the 40th verse there is a direct address by the words Ya Bani Israel, O Israelites, which of course are the Jews. But prior to that, the first 39 verses, as I said, they are in prelude to this address. They refer to various responsibilities and also assure the Prophet that he is not falling short. It is these people who have made up their mind not to follow him. And now that he has shifted to Medina, because Surah Baqarah is a Medinan surah, these idolaters who he had been facing in Mecca as well, now since one of their branches is found in Medina, so now they also need to understand that what they are doing is that they are trying to cut themselves off from the tradition of Abraham by following the machinations of the Jewish community residing there. One thing that I'd like to point out here is that whenever you read about the Jews and Christians in the Quran, please do not make a parallel with them with today's Jews and Christians. They are an entirely different lot. So these Jews and Christians which the Quran addresses here are the ones to whom the truth had been revealed in its ultimate form, and they were bent upon denying it. And when we say the truth was revealed in the ultimate form, what it means is that a prophet of God messenger of God, in fact, is sent to people and he delivers the truth to the ultimate extent. No other personality less than the prophet of God or messenger of God is able to do this. So when the Quran is speaking harshly towards them, so always remember that these harsh verses are because it is addressing a community of Jews or Christians or the idolaters who were convinced of the truth, who were convinced of the veracity of Prophet Muhammad, but they were bent upon denying him. This is not always the case with the Jews and Christians of today. And this is a very cardinal mistake that we make when we read the Quran, that we start considering the Jews and Christians that we come across in the Quran to be the same as the ones that we find around us today. So let's start off with this section. So I'm just going to read, because we've already gone through the Arabic text earlier on. I'm just going to read the translation first, and then we will see that some of the areas in which this translation needs more explanation, we will inshallah do that. So as we say, I mean, this is precisely how Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has connected the previous paragraphs with this current paragraph. And he has actually said, or actually stated in his translation, as you can see from the very first sentence, that why do you ruin yourselves by following them? So here again, the people who are addressed are the idolaters of Medina. And the word them, or the pronoun them, is referring to the Jews. So what in fact is being told to them is that, O idolaters of Medina, why do you ruin yourselves by following these Jews? Why are you being trapped by these Jews? Because they have made a plan to deny the Prophet, and now you are following them without even understanding. Oh, so once the stage had been set for this address to the idolaters of Medina, they were told that, remember, you are being influenced by this Jewish philosophy, and you must not ruin yourselves by following the Jews in this manner. And hence, what should you do? This is what you should do. O people, serve your Lord who has created you and those before you too, so that you may secure from his punishment, so that you may be secure from his punishment. O people, serve your Lord who has created you and those before you too, so that you may be secure from his punishment. He who has made the earth a flooring for you and the sky a roof, and has sent down water from the sky, then has brought forth from it various kinds of fruits for your sustenance. So do not set up rivals with God, even though you know all this. So this address is, again, as you can clearly see, relates to the idolaters of Medina, and once again they are reminded of the providence of the Almighty, how He has created this world and made every element of this world subservient to them. And when they enjoy these privileges, they must get ready for accountability. And then the next paragraph, you see the discourse shifts and it moves on. This is what this book calls to. I mean, this is the message of this book. What is the message? Ya ayyuhan nas u'budu rabbakum allazi, which is serve your Lord, worship your Lord. Servitude to God means worship to God. So this is what this book calls to. Accept it. And if you are in doubt about what we have revealed to our servant, then go and produce a single surah like it. And for this purpose, also call your leaders besides God if you are truthful in this claim of yours. Then, if you are not able to do it, and surely you cannot, then fear the fire whose fuel is those people who do not believe, and those stones of theirs too which they worship. It has been prepared for these disbelievers. And, O Prophet, give glad tidings to those who professed faith in this book and did righteous deeds, that for them are orchards beneath which rivers would be flowing. Whenever they are fed with any of their fruits, they will say, this is the same as what we were fed with before, whereas they will be given something similar to it. And they will have pure wives where they will abide in them, and they will abide in them forever. Okay, so let's look at some of the points that need explanation in these paragraphs. So as far as the first paragraph is concerned, you can clearly see that it's an invitation, a fresh invitation to the idolaters of Medina to serve the Almighty, to worship the Almighty. to remain secure from his punishment, and he has provided them with sustenance and livelihood, and therefore they should not go to anyone else, and they should not worship other deities. So remember, these idolaters, they were implicated in very, very deep forms of polytheism, and they believed that this earth and this universe has been created by God. I mean, they did not believe in someone else. They did believe in God as the Almighty Deity. But besides him, they had other deities as well, which they regarded to be his. I mean, they would think that these deities would intercede for them on a day of judgment. And on most occasions, these deities would be angels of God, and they would have given names to these angels, as you would have seen earlier on when we were discussing in some of the other courses, that Lat, Manat, and Uzza, which are the three deities which are mentioned in Surah Najm as well. So now what we will do is that we will look at some of the points in this second paragraph, and if you have questions regarding these first two paragraphs, we'll then entertain these questions and then we can go ahead. So the first thing that we need to understand here is that the Arabic word which is used in the opening paragraph is Ya ayyuhan nas u'budu rabbakum allazi, and you can see that the translation here is, O people, serve your Lord. And this is a point that I would like to emphasize here, that whenever you study the Quran and you see words like O people, Ya ayyuhan nas, and nas is the same word that you use in your Urdu language as well. O mankind is another translation. O people, O humankind. So always think that whenever the Quran speaks of a nas in a particular context, it's not always the entire humankind. There are instances in which the entire humankind is addressed in a general way, but on most occasions you will find that there is a subset of people who is being addressed, but the word used is O people. I mean, when I say O people, it's not all people of the world. And precisely here, if you look up a lot of translations of the Quran, you'll find that people have translated this word an-nas as people, and then they think that every single person is addressed here, whereas you can clearly see that the address is for the idolaters who were setting up rivals with God, who were setting up partners with God. Not everyone is doing this today. And so an-nas has an article, alif lam. So the article which is called the article which defines people, this is called, I mean, this is the same as the word the that we use in the English language. When you say the people, of course, it would mean a specific category of people. So here, O people doesn't refer to every single person in humankind. It refers to the idolaters of Medina, and a general word is used. So always be on guard that whenever you study the Quran and you find words like al-insan, ya ayyuha al-insan, ya ayyuhan nas, they have a very specific connotation on most occasions, and they are addressed to specific individuals. Don't always think that they are general words addressing mankind at large or human beings in the general sense. This is very, very rare in the Quran. The second important thing that I'd like to focus your attention is the challenge of the Quran, which is presented here. You see, the Quran challenges its opponents, and it says that, well, if you think that you are able, you think that this Quran has been concocted by the Prophet, because this is what they claim. They thought that the Prophet Muhammad has fabricated this Quran out of his own self, and he had certain jinn and evil spirits at his disposal, and he would just they would just inspire these words to him, and he would just utter these words on their behalf. So they are being told that, well, if you think that this has been inspired by the Prophet, or it is revealed I mean, he is the person who's producing it, then if you have any doubt about it, then why don't you come up with a surah like it? فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ. Now, the important thing that I'd like you to really focus yourself on is that on most occasions, people think that this challenge is actually a challenge to produce something like the Quran. I mean, something exactly like a mimicry of the Quran, to imitate the Quran. And you'll find people trying to meet this challenge by making verses of the Quran. You see verses like Al-Fil, Mal-Fil, Vama Adraka Mal-Fil, when people, they came up with this answer. They said, well, look, Al-Qariya, Mal-Qariya, wa ma adraka Mal-Qariya is a Quranic surah which says that, look, the knocking one, what is the knocking one, and what do you know what the knocking one is? I can make a rival verse or rival set of verses by saying Al-Fil, Mal-Fil, wa ma adraka Mal-Fil. Fil in Arabic is an elephant. It's the word for elephant. So an elephant, what is an elephant, and what do you understand what an elephant is? And people would say, well, what's the ingenuity in these verses that the Quran tells us that, well, you just make a surah like it, it's very easy. Now the problem here is that they have not understood this challenge in its essence. It's not the challenge of imitating the Quran. This is not what the Quran says, and because of the fact that this challenge is presented on 2 other occasions as well, on all these occasions the challenge is to produce something similar, not a mimicry, not something which is a replica of the same words. And that actually means that you produce something of the Quran, something similar of the Quran, of the status of the Quran, in which you can see that divine wisdom, in which you can see no contradiction, in which you can see flawless language, in which you can see no evolution of thought. So all these traits are traits of human discourses. So when the Quran asks its addressees to produce something like it, it's not asking them to produce a surah which is a replica or it's like a replication of what the Quran is saying. It's not that you have to imitate the Quran. No, what the Quran is saying that you produce something similar to it, not like it. So in Arabic, when it says فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ, produce a surah like it. It's not that you produce a surah which is a replica of what you are studying, but something which is similar, which should have the same traits, which should have the same characteristics. So when people started to imitate the Quran and they produced such verses which I just referred to, they actually were just imitating the style of the Quran or the words of the Quran, which is not the challenge of the Quran. And so therefore, this is one important thing that you have to understand, that the challenge of the Quran is not to produce a mimicry or produce a replica, but something similar to it. And this challenge has stood the test of 14 centuries, and we can see that not a single person has been able to produce it. And in particular, because the challenge was directed to the Arabs of those times, because as you know that the Arabs, when I speak of the Arabs, I'm referring to the idolaters. They had outstanding orators, outstanding poets amongst them. They had Qust bin Sa'ada, they had Imrul Qais, they had you can name people and of antiquity, and you'll find that they were found in 6th or 7th century Arabia. Outstanding orators, outstanding poets, producing poetry of the highest caliber, but they failed. We know that they could not answer this question. And Frazdak, one of the famous poets, we know that he gave up poetry, and when people said that, why did you give up poetry, and he said, Abad al-Quran, how can I say something when I've seen the Quran? And we find other poets also. When I talk of these poets, we are talking about classical poets who were revered by all of them. So this is the stature which the Quran occupied, and in order to befool their masses, they had to come up with this excuse that, well, it is something which is being inspired by some jinn or by the devil, and the Prophet has their services before them. Okay, then important thing is that if there are questions regarding these 2 paragraphs, please first let's have those questions before we move ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sir.
Walaikum salam.
So, sir, this green color, background color, means that all of these ayahs have the same addressee.
Yes.
But the ayah 25 started addressing the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Yes, that's like a very minor sub address that occurs in a large group of verses, and you'll see as you go along in the Quran that within a large chunk of verses addressed to a particular entity, there are very small verses which at times momentarily are directed toward the Prophet. So, this is something which is a subtle deviation in address, but because it is occurring in that large chunk, so we tend to, of course, understand and appreciate this, but as you can see that even the Prophet is addressed in a manner that he is going to tell something to these adversaries. It's not that it's a general address from the Prophet. He is being told to tell these people, these idolaters. So it is in fact God telling these idolaters. The tongue of God and the tongue of the Prophet becoming one in this instance.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sab. Dr. Sab, when the Quran challenges to produce one surah like it, the challenge seems to be rather frivolous, because it is the entire message of the Quran that is profound. It is not just one ayah or one surah of the Quran. And that, in fact, means produce a book like this, because the profundity of the Quran lies in the fact that it is as a whole, to be read as a whole and understood as a whole. Now, here only a challenge is given to produce one surah. Somewhere it's 10 surahs and somewhere it's like this Quran. Would you please explain that, please? Thank you, sir.
Yes, actually, it's like, doing Itmam al-Hujjah on these adversaries. I mean, of course, the challenge is to produce something similar to it. So you see, when something similar is not being produced, you say, okay, if you're not being able to produce the whole Quran, why don't you produce 10 surahs like it? Okay, if that is also not possible, why not a single surah like it? So it's like a tirade of counter questions, and it's like rebuke in a form that, well, you think that it has been concocted by the Prophet and you think that he has produced it from his own self, and if this is so simple, why don't you produce something like what he's saying? And if that is too difficult, let's go to the smallest unit. The largest unit is the Quran, and then we have 10 surahs, but even let's look at a single unit of the Quran, and that is a surah. So let's see if you can do that. So it's basically telling them that the basic unit of the Quran is also something that they cannot in any way replicate.
So my question is, if you ignore the parenthesis in the translation of verse 21, then it's not that clear that the addressee is the Aus and Khazraj tribes of Medina. So what's the rationale for assuming that there is a change in addressee here?
So first of all, you see, when the word says Ya ayyuhan nas, you need to understand that they are being addressed, in a way that, first of all, these chunk of verses occur in the Medinan surah. So the first decision that you can immediately take is that because Surah Baqarah is a Medinan surah, so therefore, yes, there are exceptions that at times we have Meccan verses also in Medinan surahs and vice versa, but that is a very, very exceptional case. Otherwise, if you look at the instance in which Surah Baqarah was revealed or some other surah was revealed, the first thing that you will get to know is either they are Meccan surahs or Medinan surah. So if we are satisfied that this is a Medinan surah, so the first thing that comes to our mind is that now we are in Medina. The milieu in Medina is that we have the Jews and Christians and we have the idolaters. So either it could be the Jews and Christians who are addressed, or it could be the idolaters, because we are now situated in Medina. The Jews and Christians, they did not exist in Mecca, by and large. And as far as the idolaters of Mecca are concerned, they cannot be addressed because now the Prophet has shifted to Medina. So we have either the Jews and Christians of Medina or, of course, the idolaters of Medina. But if you look at this, the whole paragraph, you'll see that polytheism is being addressed, that people who had set up rivals with God, people who had set up partners with God, they are being addressed. So we can rule out Jews and Christians here. So they did not set up rivals. They are basically monotheists. They claim themselves to be monotheists. So if you, by process of elimination, you rule them out and you see that how the Quran addresses here. So the only possibility left is that the Quran is addressing the polytheists or the idolaters. Now the idolaters existed in Mecca. The whole of Mecca was basically idolatrous. But in Medina, besides them, we had the Jews and Christians as well. But once we have ruled out Jews and Christians, what we know is that they were settled there. The tribes and also Khazraj were the idolaters. So, of course, that is how we would identify that whatever is mentioned in this first paragraph, even if you remove the brackets, cannot be anyone else.
But why can't we take the reading that, the surah begins by talking about the God-fearing and then those who have decided to reject the book and then the hypocrites. So then verse 21, 22, all the way to the verse which starts with, O Prophet, are a continuation and are being addressed to the munafiqun and saying, basically calling them back.
You see, the Munafiqun were not idolaters. They mostly came from the Jewish tribes and the Christian tribes. And they did not set up, I mean, you'll not find a Munafiq amongst the idolaters who would be, posing as if he believed in one God, whereas in his heart he would believe in several gods. They were basically from the Jewish tribes. If you clearly see, the words are فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا. I mean, the Arabic words are, do not set up partners with God. Now, look at the stress in this verse and look at the people who existed in Medina in those times. They cannot be hypocrites, they cannot be Jews and Christians, because none of them set up partners with God. The only entity that set up partners with God in Medina were the idolaters. So that is how we come to this conclusion.
But at the same time, in earlier lectures, you mentioned, the Christians who believed that Jesus was the Son of God, and then similarly Jews who believed that Aaron was the Son of God. So there was that, there was that strand as well.
Yes, but you see, I do understand. You see, at all places they called themselves to be monotheists, and the Quran respected this because they said that Trinity is a manifestation of monotheism. I mean, the Quran did not accept Trinity. It said that this is like a polytheistic doctrine, but it said and accepted the Jews and the Christians to belong to the monotheistic tradition. The Jews of Arabia regarded Ezra to be the son of God, and the Christians regarded Jesus to be son of God. But the way they explained this was as if the personality of God had manifested itself in Jesus, and similar was the case with Ezra. So they were basically belong to the monotheistic tradition. You will not find a single verse in the Quran which actually is of the, it has this word that do not set up partners with God. I mean, do not set up equals with God. Do not set up people who share in Godhead anywhere in the Quran except for the idolaters. So this is a very, very, I would say, a very specific statement which the Quran has made here, and given us this clue that basically the idolaters are being addressed here. They never ever in the Quran have the Jews and the Christians being addressed in this way, because at all instances, although they are incriminated with forms of polytheism, but the Quran still regards them to be monotheistic, and that is why the whole Abrahamic tradition is regarded to be monotheistic. Although yes, there are deviations, just as there are deviations amongst Muslims as well when they pray to saints and they prostrate before graves. So these are deviant monotheists basically, but they are not. They don't claim to be polytheists. The only entity in the whole of Arabia who claimed themselves to be polytheists were these idolaters. The Jews and Christians never called themselves to be polytheists. Yes, they were incriminated with polytheistic practices, as many Muslims are, but they claimed themselves to be monotheists, and the Quran regarded this claim as a claim of respect from them and accepted it.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a very fundamental thing. I mean, the question that you have asked is so important to the study of the Quran that all other participants who are listening here should also make this note, that such is the importance to realize the fact that at not a single instance in the whole of the Quran ever have the Jews and Christians been called polytheists. Yes, they have been attributed to polytheistic practices, as Muslims also do so, but as an adjective, never ever in the Quran you can go and see. Look at the Quran through this lens, that have the people of the book ever been called as idolaters or mushriks? Never ever. And this is something that we have to realize. Otherwise, today also there are so many people who call or regard Christians especially as mushriks, which is totally against facts.
डॉक्टर साहब, मेरा ये सवाल है कि ये जो चैलेंज कुरान ने किया है, ये तो इसके कंटेंट के ऊपर किया है ना, इसके लिटरेचर और इसके ऊपर नहीं किया ना क्लेम.
See, the words which the Quran uses, فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ, produce something similar to it. When it says something similar, it relates to the content, it relates to the style, it relates to everything that the Quran stands for. When I say please produce something similar to my book, so it's not just the style. It's the book as a whole. It's the style is one of the things that are in question. The content, of course, is another thing. The way things are presented is another thing. There's so many things which typical book would have as a distinctive feature. So it's a challenge in totality. It's not just a single aspect of that challenge that had to be answered.
जी, totality means उसके मतलब literature और वो चीज भी उसमें include हो जाएगा क्या?
I mean everything what the Quran stands for. So when I say please produce something similar to the Quran, I mean it's like a simple sentence which means, well, bring something which is of the sort of the Quran.
जी जी, मतलब सिर्फ ऐसा कहना गलत हो जाएगा कि इसमें सिर्फ कंटेंट की बात हुई है, यहाँ पर उसका लिटरेचर
Yes, that would not be correct. Neither the content, or as I said, people have generally imitated the Quran by producing verses similar to the Quran. So that too is not correct. So the Quran is not asking you to produce verses similar to the Quran. It's telling us to produce something like it, a book in which God is speaking, a book which is free of contradictions, a book which has this flowing style, a book which is mesmerizing hearts. Even in 14th centuries, you find it to be a book which is still being read and memorized. I mean, there are so many things that you can speak of the Quran. So it's like a general challenge.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Please go ahead. Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, in the first line, that is 21 and 22, in these two lines, I'm stuck in two phrases. One is the last phrase, which is "Wa antum ta'lamun," which means although you all knew. But the knowledge was given only to the Jews and the people of the book. So it seems that it is only the phrase "Fala taj'alu lillahi andadan," which is hindering in bringing these two ayat.
No, actually, I mean, you see, you have to understand what exactly does the Quran mean by when it says "Wantum ta'lamun." It's not referring to the knowledge. It is telling the idolaters that you know that this is not correct. I mean, you knew that this is incorrect. You are setting up rivals with God deliberately. Wa antum ta'lamun here means that in spite of the fact that you know that they are not rivals of God, you're still setting them up. So the word knowledge is not referring to the knowledge of Wahi.
Given the knowledge, although you were given the knowledge and you knew.
No. It means that you know.
Almighty.
No, it means basically it says that you know that these rivals that you have set up, they are baseless, they are false. I mean, this is already in your knowledge. So it's like a deliberate denial on their part.
It's about andadan, lillahi andadan.
Yes. Yeah, you know that these are not rivals. You know that they are not partners of God. You have no knowledge of you have clearly know that God did not tell you that these are my rivals. So the word ta'lamun here refers to the knowledge of idolatry.
Okay. Sir, the second phrase is the Ya Yuhan Nasu Ubudu. Sir, this also I am confused about it, that the first aspect should have been Aminu, Ya Yuhan Nasu Aminu ala Rabbukum. Why, if it is idolaters, it shouldn't have been Obudu Rabbukum, because Obudu is the second step. To first of all, they have to come to Iman. First of all, they have to accept the Iman that.
You see, you have to understand that they already served God. They already worshipped God. Now they are being told to worship one God and not set up partners with them. So Iman is going to be after that. First, they are being told that you are setting up several gods. Please come to one God. So the first thing would be
you should worship that God.
One God only. One God who has created you, who you acknowledge as your creator. Forget about the deities. So Sorbadu means they believed in God, they already worshipped him. So what they are told is, if you worship God, then worship him alone. Don't set up other deities with him. I mean, they have no status as gods. Serve one God, worship one God.
Thank you. Before we take a next question from A, I have a written chat question, and it's been asked that isn't the challenge of Quran is true for the whole mankind, for people who doubt the Quran, even people of our time?
Well, that is the secondary thing. I mean, primarily this was posed to the idolaters of Medina, of Arabia, in fact, because they were the people who said that the Quran has been fabricated by the Prophet themselves, by himself. So they are being told that, look here, if you think that he, a person who's living amongst them, who has spent 40 years of his life, he never produced a single book in his 40 years, he was never a author, and he suddenly comes up with this book. And if you think that this is something which he has concocted, then why don't you imitate? I mean, why don't you come up with something similar like it? So basically, the foremost addressees, which are the idolaters of Arabia, they are its addressees. And I mean, and secondarily, of course, this challenge is for anyone, but primarily it was for them.
So, Annie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Small point, but when you translate verse 25 and you have pure wives, shouldn't there be a spouses in parentheses?
So you see, the Quranic word is وَهُمْ فِيهَا أَزْوَاجٌ مُطَهَّرَةٌ. So because of if you let me see the text of the Quran, it says وَبَشِّرِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أَنَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ. So you see, men are being addressed here. I mean, lahum, of course, is a pronoun for the masculine gender, and they are being told that for them are pure wives, azwaju mutahara. So whenever men are being addressed, of course, this would mean that the azwaj is their wives. But I mean, on a different note, we know that whenever the Quran addresses men and says these things, vice versa is equally true. So when it is said that, well, for men they would be pure wives, this would automatically mean that for wives they would be men. It's just a question of address. So the reason that I have, or our teacher has translated as wives, is because the masculine gender is being addressed, and they are being told that you will have azwaj. And for the masculine gender, the azwaj would only have been females. So that is why it has been translated as wives. But as I said, this is only a form of address. Otherwise, it's equally good to think that, of course, women would have husbands or pure husbands.
What is the timeline from Ibrahim to Yusuf alayhi salam? Some people say it's 2400 BC to 1500 BC. Is that right?
No. How can that be possible? He was his great-grandson. So he existed 2000 years before Jesus. I mean, so 2500 years before the Prophet, roughly is the time of Abraham. So Joseph was his great-grandson. So you can, I mean, just see that the ages which are mentioned in the Bible, they are not very clear. I mean, most of them, they do mention that prophets had long lives, but we just cannot say that what exactly could be the lifetime of each prophet. What I can say with certainty is that he belonged to the fourth generation after Prophet Abraham, but then we are not fully aware of Abraham's age, and then of course Isaac's age, and then after him Jacob's age, and the fourth in line was Joseph or Yusuf. Okay, so now let's move ahead to the next part. Now the next part, again, you can see that I have colored it in a different tone, and that is which actually serves to show that this is a parenthetical sentence. This is a jumla mutraza, as you can see, and it is not a part, I mean, of the main discourse. It is just like a digression which occurs, that whenever there is something which the Almighty would like to explain forthright, or in a way that some comment has to be made on a previous set of verses, then there is this jumla mutraza. And about this jumla mutraza, which is called the parenthetical sentence, you have always, you must always realize that this discourse right before it is connected to the discourse right after it. So, in other words, if you read verse 25 and then you read verse 26 and verse 27, so you should understand that basically verse 26 and 27, they are a comment on the previous part, which is verse 25, and the discourse now is connected from 25 to 28 actually. So, as far as the middle verses are concerned, which is 26 to 27, they are just a parenthetical insertion, and I'm just going to read it out. This is a similitude of paradise. So remember that the similitude of paradise was was something that was spoken of right earlier in the previous verse, which says that this is the same as what we were fed before, that when they would be given fruits of paradise, they would say that I've eaten this right before. And the answer would be, no, you have eaten something similar to it. So once these favors and these blessings of paradise were brought into question, now there again was a point that had to be noted. And because of the fact that the Jews had again made a mess of some of these things, that they would question a lot of things regarding the hereafter, which was mentioned in the form of similitudes or mutashabihat, and they would try to nitpick at things, and they would try to find the details of such things. Now it is on this occasion that they are halted and said, well, look here, now that paradise is discussed, please don't think that everything that you are being told here is going to occur exactly the same way, because this is an unknown land, it is an unknown territory, this is an unknown world. So if God had to communicate certain things of that world to you, it had to be in sentences and in words which are similar to you. So this is what the point of caution is, and it is now stated here in these two verses. This is a similitude of paradise, and God is not embarrassed to cite the similitude of a mosquito or something even more inferior in order to explain a reality. Then those who believe know that it is a truth that has come from their Lord, and those who disbelieve say, what does God mean by this example? In this way, God misleads many by it, and many He leads to the right path by it, and in reality He only misleads by it the rebellious, who break God's covenant after making it, and who sever what God has directed to join, and in this manner spread disorder in the land. It is these who are in loss, both in this world and in that to come. So you see, this is a point of caution which the Almighty has made here. And once again, because the idolaters are addressed here, they are told that if the Almighty makes certain comparisons, then you should not think that this is, something which does not behoove the Almighty, it does not befit Him. If He makes comparisons, or if He describes similitudes of a mosquito or something which is even smaller in stature, because God wants to make you understand certain realities. And when He wants to make you understand certain realities, what does He do? He makes comparisons, He gives examples. And any one of you who would have had the chance to read the Bible, especially the New Testament, you'll find the New Testament replete with similitudes. You'll find Jesus speaking of in parables and in similitudes on most occasions, because if you are able to understand these similitudes, and if you are able to understand these parables, they really affect you, they move you. They move you like a poet would move you through his poetry. It's very similar is the case with parables, and prophets of God do employ them. If you read previous scriptures, you'll find parables being employed by a lot of previous prophets, especially Prophet Jesus. So again, on this occasion, they are being told that if God is going to speak to you in parables or in similitudes, so always think that this is something for their own good. And if you start asking questions and if you start making fun of these things, that's not going to take you anywhere. And it is here that one of the most important things are mentioned, which now I would like to explain. And here God says, if you read the Arabic, you'll find the words, يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا. When He cites these parables, God leads astray many through these parables. وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. And He guides many through these parables. وَمَا يُضِلُّ بِهِ إِلَّا الْفَاسِقِينَ. He only leads those people astray who are disobedient. So in effect, this means that whenever you see in the Quran that God is telling us that He's going to lead people astray whomsoever He wants, and He's going to give guidance to whomsoever He wants, this is not something to be taken in the absolute sense. It's always governed by the law which is stated here, and that is وَمَا يُضِلُّ بِهِ إِلَّا الْفَاسِقِينَ. That God does not lead those astray. He only leads those astray who are fasiq, who are disobedient. So at other instances in the Quran, when you find the Almighty telling you that He would lead people whoever He likes astray, it's not like a haphazard law. It should be understood in the light of this verse that He only leads those astray who are disobedient. So it's like a punishment for them. And it's not the will or the whim of God that He can just lead astray anyone and He can guide anyone. So it's not something haphazard. It's always based on this principle. So he only misleads by it the rebellious who break God's covenant and after making it, and who sever what God has directed people to join. So remember, the idolaters are being addressed, and once again in the background it is the people of the book, and especially the Jews, who are being referred to, because they were the one who had made a covenant with God that they would accept every prophet who would come after their own prophets. Remember, this is a covenant which is mentioned in the Quran and the Bible, and they were the ones who were told that they would not sever these relations, which meant, of course, that they would not break these blood relations and these ties, and in this manner they would not spread disorder in the land. So once again, although the idolaters are being addressed here, but the reference is that don't be like these people who, in their own instances, if you read Surah Al-Imran, you'll find out that they had gone far deeper into asking about certain questions about paradise, about the nature of paradise, and they would like to have pinpointed answers, and the Almighty would say that there are certain things they would not understand in this moment. They would need the next world to understand a lot of things, but they insisted. So it was at this behest that the Almighty has said, all right, at this juncture, that, oh, idolaters, look at this behavior of the Jews, don't follow them. And if they are nitpicking or asking for nitty-gritties regarding paradise, don't think that this is going to lead you anywhere, because this is not something which you are going to understand at the moment in a lot of respect. And if you do insist, then you would be led astray by it. And because of the fact that you are disobedient to God, this is a punishment that they are suffering, and you are going to suffer the same as well. And if they are doing this, remember, this is a manner in which they are basically spreading disorder. And the Quranic word for this is fasad fil ard, that when they do this, they are basically spreading disorder in the land. So do not follow them. So remember, the previous verse or the previous paragraphs, they had been directed to the idolaters. That emphasis is still there. That emphasis is still there, and because they were copying the Jews, or they were being impressed by them, so the insinuation towards the Jews has to be understood in this sense. So I am going to take questions on this paragraph once we go to the next one as well. Now you can see that parenthetical sentence has finished, and now we are back to the main discourse. And if you see, it is directly connected to verse 25. And وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا أَزْوَاجٌ مُطَهَّرَةٌ وَهُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. They were the words of verse 25. And now you can see verse 28. O people, so the Arabic words are كَيْفَ تَكْفُرُونَ بِاللَّهِ. So, O people, how can you deny God whereas you were dead? Then He gave you life. Then it is He who gives death to you after that. Then after this, He only shall give you life. Towards Him shall you be returned. It is He who created for you all things of the earth. Then He turned to the sky and made 7 skies, and He is aware of all things. Ask them, O Prophet, how do they become rejectors? And in order to make them understand our scheme regarding this world, narrate to them the incident when your Lord said to the angels, I am going to bring into existence a creation in this earth that will be given its sovereignty. They said, will you bring forth in it a creation that will spread disorder in it and shed blood? And on the other hand, such are we, that while praising you, we are glorifying and sanctifying you. He said, I know what you know not. And in order to make them understand, He taught Adam all the names. Then He brought before the angels those people whose names had been taught to Adam. Then said, inform me of the names of these people if you are truthful in this notion of yours. They said, you are devoid of all flaws. I mean, addressing the Almighty. So angels are addressing the Almighty and telling Him, you are devoid of all flaws and knowledge. You are devoid of all flaws. Of knowledge we have none except that what you taught us. In truth, it is you who have knowledge and wisdom. He said, Adam, tell them the names of those people. Then when He had introduced them to the angels, God said, did I tell you not that I know the secrets of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you are revealing and what you are concealing. So this is how the discourse has now progressed, and you can now see that the idolaters, in continuation with the previous parenthetical sentence, once that sentence had finished, you can see that it had happened once again, that as far as the discourse is concerned, it has now taken up with the same intensity, and once it has come up with the same intensity, the words are again very, very stern. It says, كَيْفَ تَكْفُرُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَكُنْتُمْ أَمْوَاتٍ. How can you deny God? You know, of course, that they did not deny God. I mean, they accepted God. So, we clearly know that they did not deny God, because the fact is that they never accepted God as one, and they did not accept the hereafter. So they thought that, well, this world is all that there is. We are not going to rise again. We know that this was the belief of the idolaters. They thought that this world is all that there is. And whenever they would be said that you'll be raised to life again, they would mockingly say that, how can we be raised to life, that when we have become stones and mud and clay, how can we be raised again? So this was, they were denying the hereafter. And the Quran has actually termed denying the hereafter to be a denial of God, because if you deny the hereafter, there's no point in believing in God. So this is how Kaifa Takfuruna is related to the idolaters. They're not denying God, because of course they are accepting God, but because they are denying the hereafter, it is tantamount or equivalent to denying God. And then it says that if this is something that you would like to further understand, then the Almighty says that, well, you need to understand once again how I created mankind. Go back, Ibn Ishaq, go back to the original, go back to the basics, because it seems that now you are so confused, or you've decided to follow the Jews in their irrational behavior, that you've forgotten the original scheme on which this world had been created, on which Adam was created. And that scheme is something that now it needs to be reminded. It now needs to be brought back before you, because unless that concept is cleared, which was there right at the start, you are not going to understand why these Jews are becoming enemies of the Almighty, and how actually they are playing the same part as Satan had played in the case of Adam. So what the role which Satan had played in the case of Adam is the same which the Jews are now playing against the Prophet. Satan denied the Almighty. He was arrogant. He said, well, I'm not going to, when I say denied the Almighty, he denied his command. He said that I'm a superior person. I'm a superior being. Exactly the same is the contention of the Jews. They said, well, if a prophet is to come, he is to come through our lineage. He should not come from the Ishmaelites. So out of arrogance, they denied the prophet. They said, we are not going to accept any prophet outside our own lineage. So the arrogance that they showed is something which was similar to the arrogance showed by Satan for Adam. And so therefore now once again, their attention is directed to that incident in which Adam was created. Now in this incident, as I have just read it out, you can see there are a couple of things that need some elaboration. First thing is the Arabic word which you can see, or the Arabic text is Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I am going to create a khalifa in the earth for you. Now the word khalifa in the Arabic language, the way it is used here, refers to a person vested with freedom of choice and authority. So this is what the word khalifa means, and we know that a lot of philosophers of this century, not previously, but in the last century, philosophers as well as exegetes have translated this word to mean the vicegerent of God, or someone who is God's, he's second in command to God on this earth. This is not the meaning of this word. For that, it had to be either appended with the alif lam al khalifa, or the word should have been khalifati. I'm creating my successor in this world. So that not being used, whenever the word is used in this sense, it means the Almighty is creating a person vested with power and authority. And precisely for this reason, the angels were perplexed, and they said, well, if you're going to create someone who's to have power and authority, he could misuse that power and authority. So why are you creating a being who is going to misuse his power and authority, cause bloodshed in the land? And we are governing this universe. So remember, it was a very subtle way for the angels to object to the scheme of the Almighty. They actually said that we already exist. We are taking care of the affairs of this world. Everything is running smoothly. And in not so many words, they said, well, what's the issue here? Why would you like to create someone who is going to cause a nuisance in the land? And look what the Almighty replied. He said, well, if this is what you think, then let me introduce you to certain people who would be outstanding in their character, who would be who would stand at the pinnacle of mankind. And so therefore, he introduced those outstanding persons like prophets of God, like the righteous, and their souls were brought before these angels. And the word which says وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, which means that Adam was taught all names. It's not all the names. As people have generally understood, they think that Adam was taught the name of every single thing found in this universe. So remember, once again, we have Alif Lam, the article, the definite article. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ. He taught Adam certain names, certain people. He introduced certain people to them. And he told them that from amongst your progeny, these are the people who are going to be the people who are going to outshine in humanity. So they were introduced to Adam, and then they were brought forth towards these angels and said, look at this. This is Ibn Taymiyyah. This is, for example, Abu Hanifa, or this is Farahi. Any person that you can think of who is decked with not only knowledge but also the taqwa and outstanding abilities of mind and heart. So these souls were introduced before they were sent in this world, into these angels, and they were told that look at these people. Can you see that these are the people who are spreading disorder in the land? So remember, the objection of the angels was that these people are going to cause nuisance and anarchy in the land. But God said, yes, there could be some people which you think are going to be spreading disorder. Of course, I'm not going to deny that. But besides them, you'll see that there would be other people who would properly use this authority, who would not misuse this authority or freedom of will. And they would be people who would be the salt of the earth, as Prophet Jesus said. They are going to be the salt of the earth, which means that they would stand at the top of mankind. They would be people that you can be proud of. And once they were presented before the angels, as you can see, that the words are فَقَالَ أَنْبِئُونِي أَسْمَاءَ هَؤُلَاءِ. Oh, please produce these people and introduce them to these angels and tell them, these are the people. Do you think that they are the people who are going to spread disorder in the land? And once this was done, the angels took a step back, and they understood that the objection they were making were, although it was valid for some people, but the Almighty answered them that this is not my purpose of making mankind or giving them authority that they can do anything. I am giving this authority so that some of them are going to outshine, and they are going to really be someone who, once they return to me, I'm going to reward them with paradise. And it was at this juncture that the angels thought that, their objection stands answered, and they said, Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana. Glory be to you. We only know what you have taught us. We don't know some of the things that you are now explained to us. So this is how we can say that as far as the names which are taught to Adam, they are not the names of all mankind. And similarly, the pronouns which are being used here, if you know a little bit of Arabic, these names are for living beings. So Ambi'uni bi asma'i haulai, all these words, Allama Adam al-asma kullaha, aradahum al-malaika. Aradahum is another, we have a pronoun which is a pronoun aradahum, if we find in that. All these pronouns cannot be used for inanimate objects or things which are not living. They are used for living beings. So basically, the names of these living beings were taught to Adam, and then he was he was introduced to them, the way they would be faring in mankind, the way they would be bringing up all sorts, they would be achieving all sorts of feats and becoming outstanding exponents of humankind. And then their souls were presented before these angels, and they were said that, look at these people. Do you think that everyone is going to cause disorder? Then please take a look at these people as well. They are not going to do the same. And this made them satisfied. And so this scheme of the Almighty was once again something which was meant for the Jews and the object deniers of the Prophet, that look how these angels, they questioned, and their question, once it was answered, they never ever became arrogant or never ever stuck to their own. In fact, they accepted what the scheme of God. So this is the attitude that you need to adopt. You can question, but once you get an answer, the right attitude would be to acquiesce, to acknowledge that answer and not deliberately deny like what Satan did. So you see, once again, what has happened is that the idolaters are being told of that original scheme in which the Almighty had created mankind. So this story is going to continue in the next paragraph as well. But before we go to that paragraph, if you have questions regarding the previous paragraph, which is 26 and 27, and then the next one, 28 and 29, and 30 and 33, please, I'm available for any questions.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you very much for the explanation. You mentioned briefly, you mentioned briefly about the Jews and their covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they made, that they're going to follow all the prophets after Moses. And right. I think you alluded to that it's in the Bible. So I was just wondering how, if you can quote that, or how can we get access to that? And
well, there are several verses.
And one more thing is that
go ahead.
What we hear now is that the Jews in this day and age don't believe in the hereafter. So how did they get rid of that concept? So that's the two.
I mean, this is something you see, there are 6 categories of Jews that you might be familiar with. They are the Orthodox Jews, they are the Neo-Orthodox ones, and there are some others as well. So it's not that all of them deny the hereafter. So you see, there are categories which the way they believe in this world is something which is tantamount to denying the hereafter. Otherwise, as far as the Orthodox Jews are concerned, they do believe in the hereafter. In fact, they think that they are the chosen people, and if ever anyone is going to enter paradise, it is they who are going to enter paradise. So the Orthodox Jews, they very much believe in the hereafter. So you see, like Muslims, the Jews are not a monolithic whole. They are not all uniform. They are not homogeneous. They are heterogeneous in this regard. Some of them have got rid of the concept of hereafter, not per se, but they believe the hereafter in a way as if it becomes inconsequential and non-substantive. Otherwise, they're hardcore, or the Orthodox Jews, they do believe in the hereafter. And they think that they are the chosen people, they are chosen here, and they are going to end up in paradise only in the hereafter.
And then, if you can shed some light on the covenant that they made with
yes, Allah. So I will. If you just give your reference to our coordinator here, I'll send you the verses.
Thank you. Annie, please go ahead.
Thank you. So 2 questions. One on the translation. Towards the end of this reading, where you translated those people. To refer to the names which God taught Adam. That's not evident from the text, right? So it just says the name. So shouldn't the reference to those names being names of people be in parentheses, just for clarity? So that's the first question.
Could you point me to the place in the text? Exactly which place are you?
Then towards the end of the passage that you read, then he brought before the angels those people whose names had been taught to Adam. So the fact that it was people, I get your comment about the pronouns that are being used for animate objects, but the text doesn't refer to those names being names of people.
So you see, the text says, "Summa aradahum alal malaika." They were presented before the angels. So aradahum actually would only mean that their personality, they as persons, and of course because people were not born as yet, they were given a glimpse of their feats, and they were given a glimpse of what they would achieve in this life. The way the Almighty did it, of course, is something that we would never know at this instant. But this is how their personality was projected before them. So you see, the Arabic words are "Summa aradahum alal malaika." They were presented before the angels.
But it could also mean...
Yes.
But it could not mean inanimate objects.
It cannot, because the word hum is not used for inanimate objects. You will never find hum, which is a pronoun used for living beings, being used in the Quran for inanimate objects like a table or something like that.
Okay, all right. And then on the text, so there is this hint towards a pre-knowledge by the angels that they had pre-knowledge of the corruption that mankind might cause on the earth. And then in this translation, when we say that, God presented before Adam or before the angels, these noble people, as you said, so that presumes that Adam and Eve would have slipped. They would have been sent down to the earth, that there would have been corruption, and that those noble people would have come in and, provided guidance on behalf of God. So there's a lot of determinism, in this text. So how do you read that?
You see, this is a very simple answer to this, and that is the angels understood the meaning of the word Khalifa. It means a person vested with authority, a person who could choose his own path. So they knew that if you are given this authority, of course, there are going to be people who would use this authority correctly, and they could use it incorrectly. They could misuse this authority. So it was from the word Khalifa, clearly from which they understood that if you're going to create someone and send him, because angels were in God's presence, and the first thing that would happen is that the people who are going to be created are going to be created on earth. It's not in God's presence. The angels lived in God's presence, and they still do. So one thing that was certain was that they would be living away from God, because one thing which prevents a person from spreading disorder or any being is his proximity to God. And because angels, although they also have free will, because they remain in God's service and they are so close to Him, the chance of disobeying Him does not arise. De jure. De facto they can. And similarly, the second thing was that they are going to be having this authority and power. So they deduced this out of this word Khalifa, that he is going to live away from the Almighty, not in His presence. And secondly, he would have the choice to make decisions out of his own free will. He could use that authority which is given to God by God to him in the proper way, and he could misuse it. So if he's going to misuse it, then it would cause bloodshed and disorder. So that is how it happened. So it's not a question of any foreknowledge that they had. It's just a question of reflecting on the words of the Almighty Himself that deduced him. And you see, the response of the Almighty also makes sense, because when they were dissatisfied of the fact that, well, when they would be given the choice of freedom and they would do all sorts of things like this, then the Almighty said, well, let me tell you that yes, this choice is going to be given to all of them, but some of them are going to use this choice in a very wise way, and hence you can see them as well.
But if we go back to the point in time when this incident is taking place, at that point in time, Adam was to live in paradise with Eve, for presumably eternity. And if they hadn't slipped, then they wouldn't have been sent down to the earth, and that mankind wouldn't have been created. And
so one thing that I'd like to clarify here is that this is again a common misconception that he was created in paradise or he was kept in paradise. The Almighty says that paradise is something which is going to come into existence once this world is going to be destroyed. So the word actually used by the Quran is Jannah. The word Jannah, as you can see, it only means a garden or an orchard. So he was kept in an orchard, and he was created in that orchard, you can say. He spent a better part of his life there, and once he disobeyed the Almighty, as we shall see in the next paragraph, he was just told to move out of this orchard and go and live his life there, and that is what happened actually. So this orchard that we are talking about is not paradise. It's an orchard that was found in all probability on this earth, and Adam and Eve were kept there. And this is a story that is going to come up in the in the very next paragraph, so we can discuss there as well. So it's not a question of they being expelled from paradise as is generally understood. So they lived in an orchard and they were just sent out of that orchard. And secondly, of course, this is something they knew that if he's going to send someone on this earth who would have this authority, and automatically this would mean that he's going to procreate, he would have children, and they would have generations. So this was something that was implied in that answer, that it's not that the Almighty had said that He's just going to create a single individual like Adam. So in effect, it meant He's going to create a race of people, and Adam would be the father of that race. And the angels understood that. So it's not just the thing that, they understood it to mean that just one person was being created. They knew that that person is going to be created in a way that he would be the progenitor of a whole human race.
So the story of, Iblis basically making Adam and Eve slip, is that just a metaphor?
No, that is not a metaphor. I mean, that is a true story. I mean, they were meant. I mean, they were stopped from eating the forbidden fruit, as we shall see in the next paragraph, and because they disobeyed the Almighty, all that the Almighty said that, okay, now you just go away from this orchard and spend your life, and I'll call you to account. And this story is coming up in the next paragraph. So we can see there as well.
So maybe, just so that I can clarify. So if they had not eaten that fruit, they would not have been exited from that orchard, and there wouldn't have.
We don't know that. I mean, we don't know that because something else could have happened. I mean, what we can do is study what has happened. What could not have happened can never be gauged, because if that had not happened, something else would have happened and we would have knowledge of that. So you see, the way to study scriptures is that, I mean, something has happened and we need to understand exactly what has happened. Otherwise, if we start making assumptions, I mean, there's no end to it. Because we can always say, if this had not happened, the Almighty would have some other thing, I mean, some other challenge maybe. So we now going to move to the next paragraph. And to understand the trial of human beings in our scheme. So remember, the previous paragraph was that in order to make them understand our scheme regarding this world. So basically, the Almighty is delineating His scheme of creating mankind. First of them was this incident between Satan and, of course, we know that as far as Adam was concerned, how he would be, between angels and him, this conversation of how the Almighty would justify the creation of a new breed of people who, according to him, would once again win his favor. So this was one part of the Almighty scheme, the dialogue between angels and the Almighty Himself. Now there is another part of that scheme in which, once this scheme had materialized, in which Adam had now been created, the next part is now being addressed. So I'm going to just read out that translation. And to understand the trial of human beings in our scheme, also narrate to them the incident when we asked the angels to bow down to Adam. Then all of them bowed down except Iblis. He refused and showed arrogance, and in this manner became among the rejectors. And we said, Adam, dwell you and your wife in this orchard, and eat freely in it from wherever you want to. But both of you, however, should not go near this tree. Otherwise you will become transgressors. Then Satan made them slip from there, and had them turned out from the state they were in. And we said, get down from here. Now you are enemies of one another, and you will have to stay on earth until a specified time and benefit from its provisions. Then Adam learned from his Lord some words of repentance, and then repented through them. At this he showed favor to them and pardoned them. Indeed, he alone is very forgiving, ever merciful. We said, get down from here, all of you. Then if ever comes to you my guidance, or any guidance from me, follow it, because those who follow this guidance of mine, their reward is paradise. So there they shall neither have any fear, nor shall they grieve. And those who rejected it and belied our revelations, they are companions of the fire. They shall abide in it forever. Now comes the second part of the scheme. So the first part of the scheme, of course, related to the creation of Adam and to the question of the angels. So remember, one thing which was very, this is something very evident from the gracious nature of the Almighty, that He could have snubbed the angels. He could have just said, well, mind your own business. I'm God Almighty. I'm going to do whatever I like. So the thing that comes immediately before us is that angels who were serving the Almighty, who were in His presence, once they objected, the Almighty entertained their objection in a very fine way. He did not snub them, giving us this very beautiful lesson that whatever your power, whatever your status, when there is an objection from people who are around you or from anything which is in your environment, snubbing them or just expressing your authority is not the right way. It's always to convince people who are around you. So the Almighty, in a very befitting manner, He gave this answer to the angels. They were satisfied. And once this had happened, once again, another thing needed to be communicated to mankind, and that is how they would be tested in this world once they are sent towards it. So I'm going to just give you a brief summary of what this forbidden tree or the forbidden fruit which is spoken of here is, and how Adam and Eve, they actually ended up, or they succumbed to this forbidden tree. So if you look at other parts of the Quran, because as you can see that this incident of Adam and Eve is not just mentioned here, it is mentioned at several other instances in the Quran, in Surah Araf in particular and in Surah Taha also. You'll find that there are two things which are mentioned with this incident. So the first thing which is mentioned regarding this incident is that Satan inveigled them. He enticed them. He said, well, if you don't eat the fruit of this tree, what will happen is that you will become mortals. So if you want to become immortal, eat the fruit of this tree. So at other instances, the word used are antakuna malakain, that you would become angels. The way angels have infinite lifetime, you would also have an infinite lifetime. So the first thing which this tree, or the consequence of eating the fruit of this tree, would be that they would have eternal life. And the second thing which is mentioned also in other instances in the Quran is that once they ate the fruit of this tree, their private parts became exposed, and they became they felt a lot of shame, and they started to cover fatafika yafsikane min warakil jannah. They started to cover their private parts to the leaves of paradise. So these two things have led our teacher Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi to believe that as far as the word ash-shajara is concerned, it is used in the metaphorical sense. So the Bible calls it to be the tree of truth and evil. We have people saying that this was the truth of, this was the tree of Zaytun, or there are so many other views regarding this tree. But Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi says that in the light of these two things, one, that once they ate the fruit of this tree, their private parts became evident to them. They felt shame. And the second thing is that if they would eat the fruit of this tree, they would become they would have eternal life. Keeping in view these two things, he says that the word ash-shajara actually refers to the act of procreation. So once Adam and Eve were kept in this orchard or this garden, they were actually made to, they were prohibited from having sexual intercourse or coming close to one another. And the way that they were being told was in this very, very subtle metaphorical way. La takraba hazihi shajara. Do not go near this tree, because as you can see that when they could not contain themselves and they ate that fruit, what happened was that their private parts became evident to them. They became exposed to them. Well, this shows that the shame that they felt once they had entered that act of procreation. And secondly, of course, it is this procreation between Adam and Eve which gives eternal life to Adam in the form of his progeny, because mankind is going to survive on this earth through that act of procreation and in generations until the day of judgment, right from Adam until to the last person. It is this act which is going to sustain their generations. So according to him, the case that he has made is that Adam and Eve were kept in this orchard, and the thing that needed to be communicated to them is that once they would be sent to other parts of the world to inhabit them through their own progeny, the greatest test that they would face would be through sex. This is one of the greatest tests which mankind would face. So one of the other tests that they would face would be the test of arrogance, which we just saw in the case of Satan, that he did not prostrate before Adam in spite of God telling him. So basically he tells us, or Ustaz Ghamidi tells us, that this whole scheme was meant to communicate these two facts. They were like two torches that were lit for us, that were like a source of guidance for us, that, well, mankind is going to flourish in this earth. They'll find outstanding people amongst them, but then there will be two areas which they would be, from which they would be ambushed, or they would be really inflicted with a lot of trials. First would be arrogance, which Satan showed, and you would have to overcome that arrogance. And second would be what Adam and Eve did. They were stopped from procreating, and they ended up procreating. And the attitude of Adam was totally different from the attitude of Satan. So Adam, as you can see, it tells us, these verses tell us that he felt ashamed. He said, well, he and Eve both said that Rabbana zalamna anfusana. These are the words which are quoted in other parts, or in Surah Araf, when this incident is mentioned there, that they said, yeah, well, we have been led astray by Satan. We feel ashamed. We are very sorry. We would like to apologize. And the Almighty revealed these words to them and said, Rabbana zalamna anfusana. Oh God, we have been unjust to our souls, so please forgive us. So the attitude of Satan was different from the attitude of Adam and Eve. He stood in front of God and he said, well, if you give me respite until the day of judgment, again, this is something which is mentioned in other instances in the Quran, then I'm going to lead them astray. So, and the other attitude is shown in contrast, is the attitude of Adam and Eve. So they, in spite of succumbing to their own desires, they immediately realized that something they had done was not supposed to have been done. So they asked for repentance. They sought God's forgiveness. They were revealed these words and they forgave. And now the Almighty said, okay, now your test is over. You can move out and go to the earth, other parts of the earth. Now I will keep sending a generation of prophets. So every time a prophet is going to come to you, you should believe in him. So you see, the whole scheme here is that now when you go down, you will see that if there is any guidance from me that I send to you, you must follow that guidance. And people who would follow that guidance, فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, they would not fear, they would not have any regrets of the past, and they would not have any fear of the future, which is a very famous statement that is often made of paradise. They would go there. And on the other hand, الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَكَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, those who deny it and reject our revelations, they would be consigned to hellfire. So this is the scheme of the Almighty, which is explained here once again to the idolaters, to make them realize that, well, don't forget that if you have come to this spot here and you've started to follow the Jews, it is because you've forgotten that initial incident in which Adam and Eve were created for a purpose, and then Adam and Eve were also given this experimental area in which they were made to, they were asked to not to indulge in something, but they indulged in it, and then immediately realized that this was something that they should not have done. They repented, and this is the right attitude. That if you end up in sinning, then it's not that you should become brave in that sin. You should not become audacious in that sin. You should immediately repent, and this is what Adam and Eve did, and this is the example that you should follow. So it is at this instance that we end this study on verse 39. And you'll find that when we study the next part of the Quran, that is where the Israelites are now directly addressed. In the few minutes that we now have, we will entertain questions on this part that I have just discussed. And of course, when we begin next week, we'll start off with questions on this part as well. And then we shall, inshallah, go on to the next part of the Quran. So if anyone has a question that we can entertain in these few minutes regarding this part, as I said, we will entertain the remaining questions in our next session as well.
Dr. Saab, when you said that Allah Ta'ala did not snub the angels, the way the words are presented, it did look like that they were actually snubbed. Allah Ta'ala explicitly asked them to name a few names. He very well knew that they would not be able to name those names because he never taught them the names. Then he put Adam and asked him the same question. He knew that Adam would be able to name the names. And then after that, Allah Almighty himself says that, did I tell you, I know that you don't know. So where did you find out, where did you gather that Allah actually patiently explained to them that what these people would do and what capable people would there be? Looks like he's actually, यहाँ तो वो डांट ला रहे हैं फरिश्तों को कि तुम्हें नहीं पता मुझे.
So that's a very, very good question, Adil, that you have asked. But in the interest of time, I'll try to answer it in a short way, but inshallah elaborate in the next session. You see, the Almighty could have, ended up not answering the question at all. He could have just said, well, you mind your own business. This is something that I'm running the affairs of this universe. The fact that he chose to, answer the angels or give an answer to the angels in the form of making them introduced to the certain personalities is in fact the first step in which we can see that the Almighty is now trying to explain his scheme towards before the angels, and he's telling them that, look here, if you are asked to do something and you don't understand, that there are certain things which I know and you don't know. So the words used are inni a'lamu ghaiba samawati wal ard. I know certain things that you do not know. A'lamu ma tubduna. Which means that I know certain things that are not in your knowledge. So and that is something which again is referred to in this verse here, and that is, he knew that there would be people who would use his authority correctly, the authority that would be granted to them, and therefore he actually made them come before them. And as far as this objection is concerned, that when he asked the angels to name those people, and of course how could they have named them, because they never knew them. So this was not an instance of cornering them in any way or making them realize that, well, you don't know anything. This was just a means of, I can say, a communication in which he taught Adam certain names, and those names, of course, were names of people who were outstanding, and they were produced before the angels. So when the same words were told to the angels, when they were asked that you please tell them, it was not meant to in any way to rebuke them, but there is a special Arabic style which because of shortness of time I might not be able to explain at this time. That Arabic style was actually meant to make them realize that, look here, this is how you need to understand that if I am doing something, then there is a reason to it. And that style is something I'll explain inshallah in the next session, because it involves certain Arabic words and analysis of the text. But it certainly was not to silence them in any way. It was just meant to, as if connecting the communication to the next step, taking it to the next level. And how it was done, as I said, I will do it inshallah when we see the analysis of these verses next time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shehzad, for today's session. And we will take up the remaining questions inshallah next week. We look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Thank you so much.